Welcome to this special segment on air brakes. The goal of this course is to help you pass the CDL written exam. However, we quickly realized that without a basic understanding of braking systems and how they work, you could easily get bogged down in the details and forget the answers to some of the very specific questions you'll be asked. First of all, there are two types of braking systems: hydraulic brakes and air brakes. As their name suggests, hydraulic brakes use hydraulic fluid to transfer pressure from the brake pedal to the brakes, while air brakes use air pressure. Now, within these two systems, there are two types of brakes: disc brakes and drum brakes. Today, most vehicles have disc brakes on the front steering wheels and drum brakes on the rear axles. In this animation, you can see that disc brakes use pads to press against the rotors, creating friction which stops the wheels from spinning. But in the case of drum brakes, curved pads called brake shoes are forced against the inside of the drum to create the friction and stop the wheels. Either type of brake can be found on a hydraulic system or on an air pressure system. Having said that, almost every air brake system in operation today uses drum brakes. So to recap, there are two types of brakes, disc brakes and drum brakes, and there are two types of braking systems, hydraulic and air. Because of their simplicity and lower cost, hydraulic systems are most commonly found in light vehicles such as cars, vans, and pickups. However, air brakes are used exclusively on heavy trucks, motor coaches, and buses, and for two very good reasons. The first is air brakes are stronger and more robust than hydraulic brakes. And the second is that if hydraulic brakes lose fluid, they may fail, and pulling the emergency brake may not be enough to stop a large vehicle. By contrast, if air brakes lose pressure and fail, the vehicle will immediately come to a stop. Sounds confusing, doesn't it? Well, don't worry. It will all become clear in the following sections. Hydraulic is defined as the process by which a mechanism is activated or controlled by fluid under pressure. So in a vehicle fitted with hydraulic brakes, the front disc brake pads and the rear drum brake shoes are pressed against the discs and drums by hydraulic brake fluid in the brake lines. When you press down on the brake pedal, you exert pressure on a master cylinder filled with brake fluid, and this pressure is then transmitted through the brake lines to force the pads against the discs and the shoes against the drums. For safety, the front brakes and rear brakes are both on separate dedicated lines. As you can see, it's a fairly simple system. Many of the buses you see today, whether it's a motor coach, a transit bus, or a school bus, are equipped with air brakes, and as a licensed commercial driver, you'll need to understand how they work. The first thing you need to know is that air brakes have three important functions. They act as the service brakes, which you use for everyday stopping, the parking brake, which you engage every time you leave the bus, and the emergency brake, which engages automatically if the air pressure falls too low. Okay, so here's a diagram of the typical air brake system. A bit more complicated than hydraulics, isn't it? Well, we're going to animate this diagram as we explain what happens when the driver starts the engine. First thing to happen is a governor activates a valve inside a compressor which pumps air into the supply tank. A governor is a device that senses how much air is in the system and either starts the airflow from the compressor or stops it to maintain just the right amount of pressure for braking. Once the right amount of pressure has built up, the driver would perform a variety of tests, which we'll discuss later. But for now, let's skip ahead to getting on the road. Once the pressure has built up, the driver releases the parking brake and air is forced into the spring chambers on the rear wheels. Inside each chamber, a powerful spring has been mechanically applying the brakes. But now the air pressure pushes it back, allowing the wheels to turn freely. This action is also what makes the emergency brake system ready to engage. Okay, so let's roll. As you're driving down the road and you need to stop or slow down, you press on the spring-loaded brake pedal, sometimes called the treadle valve or foot valve, and air is quickly sent to the front and rear brake chambers. You'll notice that, like hydraulics, this diagram shows two separate systems providing the air, a primary tank and a secondary tank. This is called a dual brake system, obviously. Anyway, inside the brake chambers, air forces a diaphragm to push against a rod, which engages the brakes. Simple, huh? Well, at least that part is, right? Okay, if all goes well, you come to a stop. When the driver lets up on the pedal, or treadle if you prefer, air is released from the system through several valves to quickly allow the brake pads and brake shoes to retract and allow the wheels to spin freely again. And that's how air brakes work. Okay, I guess we're done. Thanks for watching. If only it were that easy. Stay tuned, because next we're going to take a closer look at each of the components of the system. But first, here's a few review questions taken right from the actual CDL exam. Here's your first question. What are spring brakes? Are they A, the brakes used for parking, B, wow, I'm not even sure what that means, or C, the spring on the brake pedal? I should mention that sometimes the proofreader for these questions must have been asleep. Anyway, choose an answer and click Submit. Question number 2. What do air brakes use to make the brakes work? This is not a trick question. It really is that obvious. Gas, oil, or air? I'll let you figure this one out. Now a true or false question. The governor controls when the air compressor will pump into the air storage tanks. True or false? Here's one we just talked about. What is a dual air brake system? If you'll recall, we mentioned the primary tank and the secondary tank, providing air to separate systems as a fail-safe against brake failure. And finally, question number 5. What are two other names for the brake pedal? Remember that with hydraulic brakes, the pedal pushes a piston in the master cylinder, but with air brakes, the pedal opens a valve. Okay, good job. Now let's look at the pieces and parts of the air brake system.